Welcome to another episode of Takeoff Talks, a show where we look into the world of estimating, the numbers that move your bid. Here's a number that trips up more earthwork bids than almost anything else on a construction project. 1 yard of dirt is not 1 yard of dirt. It depends entirely on where you measure it. Get this wrong, and your truck count, your borrow quantities, and your bid price are all wrong with it. Let's break down bank yards, loose yards, and compacted yards, and why every estimator needs to know the difference. Let's start with bank cubic yards, or BCY. This is soil measured in its natural, undisturbed state, still sitting in the ground exactly how it's been for years, before anyone's touched it with an excavator. When you're working off cross-sections in a plan set, or pulling numbers from a mass diagram, you're almost always working in bank cubic yards. That's your baseline. It's the volume the designer calculated based on the existing ground surface versus the proposed grade. Here's the thing to remember, BCY is a measurement of dirt at rest. It hasn't been dug up, it hasn't been hauled, it hasn't been compacted anywhere else. It's just there, and that matters, because the moment you touch that dirt with equipment, its volume changes. Now here's where it gets interesting. The second you excavate the bank material, it swells. Air gets introduced between the soil particles as they're broken apart, and the material takes up more space than it did in the ground. That excavated, loosened material is measured in loose cubic yards, or LCY. And this is critical for one specific reason. This is what your trucks are hauling. When you're calculating how many truckloads it takes to move your cut material, or how many loads of borrow you need to bring in, you need to be working in loose yards, not bank yards, because that's the actual volume sitting in the truck bed. A typical swell factor might run anywhere from 15 to 30%, depending on soil type. Clay swells differently than sand, sand swells differently than rock. And that factor should come from your geotechnical report, not a rule of thumb, because guessing here directly affects your truck count and your hauling cost. Third state, compacted cubic yards, or CCY. This is the material after it's been placed as embankment or fill and compacted with rollers to meet the density requirements in the spec. Compaction squeezes the air back out of the material, and often packs it tighter than it was even in its original bank condition. That's the shrink. So counterintuitively, your finished fill volume is usually smaller than the bank volume of dirt you started with, even though it swelled in between during hauling. This is the number that matters when you're calculating how much material you need to build a section of embankment to grade. If you only think in bank yards, you'll underestimate how much material you actually need to place, because some of that volume disappears into compaction. One last thing, where do these percentages actually come from? Never guess. Your project's geotechnical report will have swell and shrink factors specific to the soil types found along your alignment, because different soils behave completely differently. A sandy soil might swell 15%, a